hold your applause for all the panelists until the end so we can get through what they'd like to say. And also, I should add that feel free to address the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which is a sister statute to RFRA.
Great, thank you. So Howie mentioned some of the data that bears out the fact that RFRA has mostly been used successfully by religious minorities. And that's something that I think many people don't realize, especially in this day and age and the period after the very controversial Hobby Lobby case, where RFRA, for many Americans, is suddenly all about enabling discrimination by conservative Christians against women and LGBTQ individuals. So given this widespread perception, several scholars of religious liberty jurisprudence have dug into the cases to see if there's any truth to that claim. And so one study called Sex, Drugs, and Eagle Feathers by my former colleague Luke Goodrich did an empirical analysis of religious liberty cases after Hobby Lobby, and he looked at cases specifically in the 10th Circuit and reviewed over 10,000 decisions, focusing on every religious freedom decision in the last 5 and in some cases 10 years. And after this very extensive analysis, he found that religious liberty cases are still really rare. They only make up 0.6% of the federal docket. And contrary to predictions that religious people would be able to wield Hobby Lobby as a trump card, successful cases are even more rare. And there have only been 5 winning issues within the 10th Circuit in the last 5 years, and those pertain to Sharia, polygamy, eagle feathers, contraception, and the 10 Commandments. He also notes that despite this misunderstanding that Christians would be the prime beneficiaries of the Hobby Lobby decision, the data actually shows that's religious minorities who continue to benefit the most. Another scholar, Christopher Lund, actually looked more broadly at all cases since RFRA was enacted, and he found, again, that the majority of RFRA and state RFRA cases have little to do with discrimination or sexual morality or the culture wars. And these cases get almost no attention, even by the scholars in the field. And so Lund writes, whatever else can be said of them, RFRA and state RFRAs have been valuable for religious minorities who often have no other recourse when the law conflicts with their most basic religious obligations. And then he goes on to list a few cases. He lists a case involving a 5-year-old Native American boy who was told by his public school district that the school policy forbade boys from having long hair. So the girls in the school could have long hair, but the boys couldn't. And the court in that case was able to use a Texas RFRA to be able to win him this right to grow his hair in accordance with his religious beliefs. RFRA has also protected a Jehovah's Witness from having to pledge allegiance to the US Constitution in violation of her belief that she can only pledge allegiance to God. And it also came to the rescue for 2 Sikh children who are not allowed to carry their kirpans to school. So the kirpan is a small, blunt ceremonial dagger. The Sikh Articles of Faith obligates all Sikhs to carry the dagger as a constant reminder about his or her obligation to protect and serve the weak. And so in Chima v. Thompson, the school forced the students to choose between school expulsion and criminal prosecution and their violation of their religious convictions. And we can understand to some extent that the school would have legitimate concerns related to carrying a small dagger into school. But given the bluntness of it and this relatively harmless nature of this article of faith, the court was able to use RFRA to strike a balance there. We understand you have a concern, but there's ways that you can more narrowly tailor the solution and not ban it so broadly. And then when it comes to Muslims, in the post 9/11 context, there has been a startling increase in anti-Muslim prejudice and discrimination, with extremely sharp rates in the last couple years, in particular in hate crimes against Muslims, including more specifically Muslim women in headscarves. And in these cases, RFRA provides heightened protection. Many of the Muslim religious liberty wins, however, have been in the prison and in the land use context, as Emily pointed out. And that's important also, so those have occurred under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or RLUIPA, but RLUIPA and RFRA are intrinsically connected. As originally passed in 1993, RFRA applied to all 3 levels of government, federal, state, and local, but after the US Supreme Court's 1997 ruling in City of Bernie v. Flores, RFRA applied only to the federal government, not to state or local governments. So this basically just opened up all the space for religious minorities to continue facing restrictions on their religious practice. So in response to Bernie, in 2000, Congress passed RLUIPA, to correct some of the constitutional infirmities of RFRA. So under RLUIPA specifically, Muslims have won pretty big. Most recently, one of the most prominent cases is a recent win 9-0 at the US Supreme Court in a prisoner case called Holt v. Hobbs. Gregory Holt, who's also known as Abdul Malik Muhammad, was an inmate of the Arkansas Department of Corrections and a practicing Salafi Muslim. And he needed the prison to accommodate his ability to grow a beard in accordance with his religious practice. Many Muslim men grow the beard as a way to emulate the Prophet Muhammad. And he was willing to accommodate and say that he would basically just limit the beard to 1 inch. And believe it or not, the prison refused to accommodate him, saying that this 1 inch beard was going to allow him to bring in contraband, notwithstanding the fact that most other prisons in the US allow prisoners to grow beards for both secular and religious reasons, and that there are obvious ways to be able to check a very short beard to see if there's anything hidden in it. And so Justice Alito wrote the opinion for the 9-0 majority. The court held that the prison had violated RLUIPA. The court relied specifically on Hobby Lobby when it held that Holt met the standard for accommodation. That is, that an accommodation must be based on a sincerely held religious belief. So that's a really concrete example of how Hobby Lobby came into play in a Muslim context. And then the land use context, we've seen quite a few cases of hostility against Muslim communities trying to build houses of worship. A particularly notorious example is one in Murfreesboro, Tennessee in 2012, where it was actually argued in court that the Muslims should not be able to build a house of worship because Islam is not a religion and therefore does not get protections under RLUIPA or the First Amendment. And it was a pretty bizarre argument. Unfortunately, it went on a little bit longer than it should have been allowed to, but in the end, the Islamic Center prevailed. A more recent case in 2017, it was in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. After 5 years, 39 public hearings, and 2 lawsuits, the Islamic Society of Basking Ridge was finally able to build a new mosque. Bernards Township had refused to let the society begin construction based on the alleged issues with minor details of its proposal, including the size of the parking lot. These concerns about parking, etc., were largely a cover for anti-Muslim discrimination. As The Atlantic explained, this case was a particularly nasty and controversial example of a local board discriminating against a religious group that wanted a place to worship. But while the Bernards Township case is distinctive, it is no way unique. Religious discrimination in the US often happens in the most quotidian settings, including debates over zoning ordinances. So using RLUIPA, the Basking Ridge Mosque reached a settlement of $3.25 million in damages and attorney's fees. In 2014, a mosque in Bridgewater, New Jersey settled for almost $8 million, and 2018, the mosque in Bayonne, New Jersey settled for $400,000. So definitely under RLUIPA, Muslims have won big. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma. Greg?
Well, thanks, Emily, for inviting me to participate in this panel, and